Hey, it's Chris. Paverson Games. Luthier, if you're American, or Luthier, if you're pronouncing it the French way. It is now going on. What do you need to know? Where are things at? What's going to help you figure out whether or not this heavy game is right for you? Let's go. So there's a lot going on with this game, truth be told. This is a 30-page rulebook, folks, and this is dense heavy. That's the first thing. If you're like me, you need to be aware of how interconnected, how woven these mechanisms are as a whole. As you can see on front of me right now, I have a huge board, 5 separate areas, 3 separate tracks, not even to go along with the marketplace, the round marker, the chip area, or the prestige victory point scoring area, or my own personal board. This is a big hog from a table space standpoint, right? And the nuance of this game is going to be the make it or break it for you. And the first big thing I'll have to say, besides this is not distilled, slightly twisted around, folks. This is much heavier. This is much more interwoven and interconnected. You're going to be having resources and patrons and tracks and area control and hidden worker placement bidding, with mitigation and 3 different things at each of the different sections, and the activation in whatever order you're choosing to do on a round by round basis over 6 rounds in order to get the most prestige points at the end to, basically please your patrons so that they don't screw you at the same time. I need to be very careful, obviously, but I really need to emphasize that point. This game is not going to let you just passively play it. If you're looking for that as a worker placement or that style of things, this is far from it because of that last issue that I mentioned. One of the areas over here, one of the main mechanisms, your patrons. This is a thematically incorporated game if you're not familiar with these classical music eras from the past. I am, actually. I went to a liberal arts college and I had to take a class on classical music. So, thematically incorporated, right? You had patrons if you were an artist, right? And if you did not perform in an adequate manner for those patrons, they left you high and dry, because similarly to now, art doesn't pay except if you're the top, right? And that's what this is trying to emphasize in a different manner. Please the people that are paying you, or else. And that's because when you start looking at these patron cards, whatever types they are, whether it's a tier 1 card, a tier 2 card, or even one of the royal ones that's going to be available to you, one of the several different types of them in the first place, whether they're composers, producers, nobles, whatever it may be, specialty wise, they are going to either benefit you, if I actually flip it face up right here, but they're also going to take away points if you don't please them and they get impatient with you, because you're going to be moving them across the bottom of this track on your little player board here as you go across. So you're going to see, as I put it out right here, that they're going to be slowly patient cubing going across here to correlate with the values at the bottom. And if you just let them get to the end without meeting one of their various achievements or goals, if I can actually grab the card here, that's indicated up here at the top usually, then they're just going to leave and really smash you for victory points, like not insignificant amounts. So you have to be aware of that. You have to choose carefully, not just choose whatever is present. And you can do that, and this game offers you mitigation in those ways. In each of these deck areas, it allows you to pay inspiration or money to search for one that you want. So you hate deck randomness? Ooh, I can mitigate that a little bit, but it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you 10 combo of money inspiration. And that's a hefty price to pay. But if the one you want isn't out there in the 2, 3, 4, 5 selection spots that are there in the first place, depending on if it's the instrument section, the repair section, the patron section, the performance section, or any of the combination of which you need. And that's what you're going to be trying to do with your various workers a la these that are going to be the main crux of how you're doing it. Now you'll notice as I accidentally flip that face side down that these all have 2 different sides. And what you've got going on here essentially is your hidden worker placements, because you're going to be putting these numbers face down in each area that's going to be available to you on a turn-by-turn basis. And no one else is going to know, because the number is going to affect the priority and the advantage that you're going to get at that location in the first place. So that's not insignificant. You may think so, especially the first time or two you play, but it cannot be discounted because priority is secondary in terms of timing. So if I just play one that's stronger than you, if I play my 5 and you have a 3 there, doesn't matter if you played it first, second, third, and I played it last. I'm going to go before you in that location and have more access, more availability, more of what I want. Now, therein lies a few other little caveats. You have your special little workers right here that are going to be essentially passive upgrades, if you will, because you swap in one of these and it becomes the equivalent. In this case, it would be a 3. I would place that on my card that gives me this worker in the first place that I'm acquiring from one of the said decks mentioned earlier. And then it gives me a passive ability along with this priority anytime I play it in the future. So it upgrades. You're not getting more workers, but you upgrade them. You can slightly upgrade them, though, because you're going to look at this and go, well, the other main aspect is you're going to have apprentices, right? Apprentices that you're going to acquire, but also spend because they're, well, not invaluable. They're, well, expendable. And these apprentices come in the form of slightly thinner discs that you can place alongside another disc once you've placed a worker there in the first place, which just improves their priority by 1, and you can have a max of 3. So that gives you ways of, well, outmaneuvering. What did I put down there? Am I bluffing? Am I a little bit trying to make you go there with one of your higher ones, even though maybe I put the 1 in the 1 apprentice, even though now you maybe think it's a 4 or 5, so you're going to have to really... So that's the dynamic you're doing, because you're gathering the resources to create these instruments in your animals, your woods, your valuable ingredients, and then you are playing those cards, crafting them, repairing them, or performing, because that is not only going to have an impact on the value that each of them gives you, but it's going to also potentially move you up one of these 3 tracks that are available to you in terms of passive income, passive bonuses, or one-time bonuses as well. Things you're very, very familiar with if you're looking at this. The other more divisive element, the other thing that is going to potentially be something that you enjoy or you don't, is just this main part of the center board here, the orchestra portion of things right here as I'm pointing. You'll notice on this section of the board, green, blue, red, the 3 time periods of the music in the first place. And then you're also noticing that there are 3 tiers of instruments, your percussion, your winds, and your strings. And so each of them is going to be available to be crafted. And then you also have your rares up at the top here as well. There's 1 of each of these. But as you're crafting them from this deck, you're going to be placing in the corresponding spots. And this would be the instrument correlation. So you search through your little tokens here and you get to place one of your instrument tokens onto that spot. And you get to mark that spot, if I can actually find the right one here a second, on the timpani. I was a percussionist. The only thing I'll say about this orchestra board is there's not enough percussion. I need some more cowbell. Anyway, sorry, totally different thing. But where I'm going with that, though, is there is an order that goes along with this iconography placement, meaning the other icon that you get to place, if you repair one of these in one said, then you get to place it also in the area. But there is a priority that you need to be aware of because you have those 3, right? The performance, the repair, and the craft. And performance trumps them all, meaning mine gets first place and potentially knocks some other ones out if it is going into an area that's already otherwise occupied by other players' tokens. Because part of this endgame scoring buffet, if you will, is how many first chairs you have. If you're not familiar with orchestral rumblings and rankings, if you will, each section in an orchestra, band, or anything along those lines, you get graded. So first chair, you are the best one in that instrument, period, right? And you are going to be set collecting in the center here, trying to get the most first chairs. So you're going to be bumping out people from other areas. You're going to be trying to upgrade with the performance versus the crafting versus all of those things in order to get the most of those that you can, in combination with all of the plethora of the other things that I haven't even mentioned for an in-game scoring sort of situation, right? The first chairs, the highest of each of those levels, the powers, and then the sum total of your resources, right? So this is not insignificant. By the way, here's the iconography for this game. Yeah, not horrible, but again, you need to know what you're getting into from those sides of things, right? Your main resource currencies down here, your money, your inspiration, your prestige victory points, the 3 resources I mentioned, and all of the other stuff that's going to go along with it. The Baroque, the classical, romantic eras that we're talking about in the orchestral regions, and then all of the instruments, the patrons, and the other things that go along with it, right? You don't need me to go into any more detail there. But the game is going to be dependent on some of these areas of mitigation. How do you mitigate? And part of the way you're mitigating is dice, for example. You know, when you're performing, these performance cards are going to have rewards based on what you roll with dice. And those dice, well, they're not always that good. They don't really have a whole lot of numbers on the sides, right? That Y die has 2, 0, 1, and 2 on its sides. And if you need to get a 13 plus to get the bottom reward of this performance card here, that's not going to be freaking easy. But that's why you increase the passive tracks that I just mentioned, so you get to upgrade to the purple and the black dice instead to give you more. And then you can use inspiration, and you can use some of those resources and exchange and manage and all of those things to go along. And again, you have your individual player board here that gives you 3 slots of managing patrons along the same lines, where you also get a passive ability depending on which slot you put it in terms of rewards. And it has a lot going on because you also start off with your individual family ability here. I'm the Stradivaris in this case. And so my Stradivaris get a whole different starting resources as well as passive powers to begin. Right? And so that's going to be how you're going to be dynamically interweaving, interacting, and exchanging with this game. Does that sound like fun to you? Again, let me emphasize, this is a heavy game. This is not Distilled. It's got some minor reminiscent componental similarities, but it is not, if I liked Distilled, I am going to like this game. You can see the Paverson themes of the interwovenness between some of it there, but basically take that and multiply it by several times, and it's going to be that much more thinky, especially with these patrons who are going to be very, very difficult to keep happy, depending on what their requirements are on the side that you're going to be having to meet, as well as the bonuses or not that they're going to be providing you if you can do so. So, I mean, again, it's a lot going on. That being said, pros, cons, everything else in between. Well, I mean, that is by far in a way the biggest one, right? The other that I mentioned, the hidden priority, in a very weird, different way, right? It gives you almost a Fractured Sky vibe of putting stuff down, wondering, bluffing, kind of doing that. Do you enjoy bluffing? Like, I haven't played any worker placement games like this, so I can't say that, you know, it's going to be very similar to anything else. But I think of Fractured Sky from IV Studios as the comparison, right? Where you had the magnetic chips that you put underneath the ship, and you said, okay, I'm going to go in this area, and we're going to see what happens, right? And that would be the biggest dilemma I would have for, say, the folks that are looking at this, the Eagle Griffin game fans who are looking Lacerda heavy and saying, do I like this style of things, Baroque style of things, classical, whatever it may be? And that may be the biggest management issue for you, because those games are offering you more complete control where you are grasping it, squeezing the life out of it, squeezing the hope from your opponents as you slowly encircle and snare them until they have no choice but to yield. And that's where the bluffing is going to come in with this, is you may think that you're outmaneuvering someone else, and you're not going to have that complete and utter dominance that you may want. I'll also make the argument that this is probably going to be somewhat similar in that, to maximize some of that main mechanic, right? The main bluffing, bidding mechanic, to get the most dynamic, interactive experience on the tabletop, you're going to want 3 or 4. You're going to want 3 or 4. That's going to increase the game length time, though, 2 significantly. This is the 1 to 2 player side, right? So there's less spaces over here, there's less spaces over here, you know, it's slightly different arrangement here. You have to do a little bit of setup here with the orchestra card as a whole when you got the 2 players of placing stuff down that I don't have set up for you here, but things that are going to be slightly different. You've got an AI that you can add as a 3rd player, but if you're like me, with very interactive games in some way, shape, or form as a mechanistic approach, an AI system just never quite gives you the screw you factor of a person. And I don't say that as a direct, like, this is take that or anything. It's not. But I'm just saying, you know what I mean, right? That the way I think about things, the way that another person, a human, thinks about things, and the way an AI system is designed to think about these things are just different. And imperfect as it may be, your boy right here, it just provides a different dynamic around the table, right? It just feels more sterilized with those elements for me personally. So that's why I prefer players and player counts. Could you play this at 2 and be very happy? Yeah, you could. But I don't think it's going to maximize what this game is bringing differently than the other Lacerda-esque heavy worker placement games in the first place in that case. You know, unless you really love the theme, unless you really love Paverson, unless you really love the deck management and the, you know, the orchestral involvement, which I do, right? I was a percussionist and I loved beating drums and doing that 4 years in high school. Anyway, and so that'd be my main concern as a whole. Not a downside, not a negative necessarily, but a is this right for you factor above all else. 6 rounds, I mean, 6 rounds is a lot, but it's also not enough to make you feel like, oh, wow, this is really like going to be way too long either, because you're simultaneously going through these areas as you want to reveal them in whatever order to then figure out what you're doing. So it mitigates it in that way, shape, and form. The tracks are nice. I don't think there's a track that is more beneficial or less beneficial. It's, again, how you prefer to structure it. It's heavy iconography. It's heavy rules. Folks, this is not Distilled. Paverson Games has done a wonderful example with the rehearsal book here, just like they did with Distilled, of saying, okay, these are the rules. And then these are the turn by turn. You can see, we're going to walk you through player by player what it's going to look like for a couple turns. So you can do that. And that is fantastic. But this is not going to be even the same amount of teach as, say, a Distilled, because it's that much more in depth. It's not that much harder individually, conceptually, but it's still going to leave people who thought even that was borderline too heavy for them, it's going to push them over the edge. And so if you're looking at it from that aspect, I would say pass. I would say pass altogether. This is going to be too heavy in those manners, where it becomes an exercise in frustration rather than an exercise in fun. And that's what it needs to be for you if you're looking at this in the first place. It has the dynamics, it has the elements, it has the little bit of push it around here, it has some availability mitigation and availability and mix matching and all of this stuff and everything that go along with it. It's there. But it's also going to be very difficult if you're not used to it. This is not a one that you would go into and learn how to do it with this one. This is my first time sort of game in these ilks in the first place either. Again, I don't say that's a bad thing. I say that as if you're interested in it, maybe go start with something like a Distilled. Maybe start with something slightly Dune Imperium-esque. And then work your way up to this if this really speaks to you then. Because I love the theme. I think they did a wonderful job incorporating it. But if you're going after it because of theme alone, you know, buyer beware, as I always say. Mechanisms are always the most important aspect, period. And going back to that point, which I didn't really hit on exactly, right? I showed you that this is the 2-player side, which means on the 3 and 4 player side, you're also going to have more spaces for all of these action cards, which means more availability, more variability, more, well, just not having to spend a huge amount of resources to thumb through this deck and get the one you want. I mean, you can still do that, But it may mean that you can spend all of those resources elsewhere, making you feel better about your choice in the first place, rather than, sunk cost fallacy of getting the one you need and, forcing your strategy that way because you really need that piece of wheel in the cog in the first place, or that instrument in the orchestra. That being said, I mentioned that the heavier gamers may have some concerns about that. Don't be fooled, though, at the same time. This is a potentially very strategic, if you're doing it willy-nilly, tactically based round by round, you're going to fall forward and it's going to hurt your face like I do. And so you're not going to necessarily enjoy it. Or you know what? You may still enjoy it. You're just going to suck at it. That's pretty much me in every game like this. I still enjoy it, but the overall strategery still has to be there because of all of these things going on. There's too much for you to just fly by the seat of your pants like I often prefer to do in a lot of games. So if you're looking at it from a heavier gamer side of things, it will still have a very strong element of that. You could make the argument that because, again, you've got the 5 different areas, the orchestra on top of that, the 3 tracks, the public goals, the personal objectives, all of those things that I didn't even talk about, let alone incorporating that with the 3 special workers and the passive abilities that go along with them, and then the asymmetric families that you're going to be able to choose from at the beginning. Analysis paralysis potential is high. It's high. It totally is. And so you can't discount that in the first place, even though the simultaneous reveal of all of the workers at a place will mitigate that some. It's getting to that point where everyone is placing these 5 workers down, right? 5 workers already with your apprentices, using your apprentices as other things along the way. So multi-use, multi-variable calculus. No, multi-use, multi-variable situations and thoughts and all aspects. So the question you have to ask yourself then is that what I am truly looking for? Or on the opposite end of the spectrum, is that, frankly speaking, just too much? 6 rounds of that, points at the end. So who is this game ultimately for? Final thoughts, right? This is the most thematically incorporated game, especially from a Euro side of things, as a worker placement that I have ever played, right? It knocks that out of the park. That being said, okay, gameplay wise, blind worker placement bidding, not knowing, trying to anticipate where other people are going to put their workers. It's not terribly different in the planning and the point salading that people are going to see. The squeezing out of the strategy is going to be partially there, but partially not there because of that blind bidding worker placement mechanic. I like it. I can see a lot of people being turned off because of the lack of perceived control, we'll say. Like I said, the comparison to Distilled. If you're looking for a Distilled, this is not that. This is going to be easily 2+, even at some of the 2 or 3 player, lower counts overall. Probably more than that, based on the real chance of your group having any significant analysis paralysis. The other big thing that I was kind of having mixed feelings on was the specialty workers, right? When I was looking at this originally, I was hoping yes, gain a worker, right? Like a lot of games do, where all of a sudden you get an extra. And yes, this plays on that trope. It gets away from that, I guess, if you will, at the same time of replacing. But which one do you replace? And again, does it really make that worker that much more asymmetric? I wouldn't have mind just something a little bit more in that sense. The attention to detail is there. The overarching smoothness, like I said in Distilled, is there. But it's more like Distilled on steroids in terms of complexity and length comparatively, not necessarily for you individually. And that's the question you're going to have to ask yourself. Does that really fit what I can get to the table, as is always the biggest test, no matter how pretty or how deluxeified or anything else along those lines it is. right? The mitigation of those decks, of having more player spots, I kind of wish that that was more available at the lower player counts in order to, you know, offset some of the, if it's not out there, I don't really want to spend that many resources to get the one I want, because, you know, it's just, you know, robbing Peter to pay Paul essentially in that way. And I can't do that often that well. The patrons, again, that's going to be a min-max. Very frustrating if their patience runs out and you get slammed for victory points if the stuff you need isn't coming up easily, or if other people are getting it. But again, that's where the blind bidding mechanic is going to be needed to be very strongly incorporated into your strategy in the first place. And ultimately, how do you feel? So there you go. Those are my thoughts. Luthier, there you go. It's currently ending on crowdfunding right now at the time of me filming and airing this, so check it out if you're interested. Link down below. As always, thanks for watching. Stay classy. Have a great freaking day.